So, it finally happens. After years of growing warnings from analysts, reporters, and diplomats, the nightmare scenario actually happened. Haiti has collapsed. Not in the sense that we're used to hearing the term used as a way of describing a nation overrun by armed gangs, but a genuine, full-on state collapse. The sort of failure that Somalia underwent in the 1990s. The government has crumbled, leaving no central authority. The police forces have all but evaporated. The streets are now completely under the control of armed groups that burn and rape and loot and murder at will. As Foreign Policy put it in a recent article, the Haitian state has functionally disintegrated. It gives us very little pleasure to say that we've been warning about this for over a year now. Since January 2023, we've posted something in the region of 4 videos on the subject, trying to add to the chorus of urgency, the chorus begging the world to act before it became too late. Well, in this, we and everyone else raising the alarm failed. The world let any chance to act slip through its fingers, and now we're all going to have to live with the consequences. Because, make no mistake, the collapse of Haiti is not something that exists only on the news, a sad story to make viewers feel bad before they scroll on to something else. It's a real nightmare that is unfolding a mere 1,000 kilometers from Florida, one that's a tragedy for Haitians, but also an event with the potential to destabilize the Western Hemisphere. We'll come into what we mean by that later in today's video, but first we need to sketch out how we got here. How Haiti went from being poor and troubled to a country that is arguably now in a state of civil war. The immediate causes are clear. Toward the beginning of March, the unelected and unpopular Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, left Haiti to fly to Kenya for a meeting with President William Ruto. The reason was to seal an agreement whereby Nairobi would send a UN-backed force of 1,000 policemen to Port-au-Prince to help dismantle Haiti's gangs. Unfortunately for Ariel Henry, though, the gang struck first. With Henry out of the country, Haiti's warring criminals did something they've never done before. They joined forces. Under the leadership of former policeman Jimmy Barbecue Chirazier, the gangs rose up in a coordinated, sustained bout of violence. Over the next few days, prisons were ransacked and thousands of prisoners were freed. Vital infrastructure, including airports and ports, were attacked. In this, the outburst was similar to what gripped Ecuador back in January, when a gangster uprising saw the government briefly lose control of the streets. But Quito had the resources to declare a state of internal armed conflict and deploy the military nationwide. While things remain shaky, the government is at least back in control. Haiti, on the other hand, was incapable of fighting back. To see why, look no further than the employment figures for Haiti's security services. After the army was disbanded in the 1990s, it was only reformed in 2017, and then more as a Praetorian Guard than an actual military. The New Yorker reports that there are only 500 active members. The Haitian National Police, meanwhile, has between 5,000 and 8,000 officers to police a nation of over 11 million people. As we've mentioned before, New York City alone has 36,000 officers. With such a deficit in numbers, Haiti's police were quickly overwhelmed, and so the weekends of the 9th to the 10th of March saw the nation drowned in chaos. Read the reports, and the details are eye-popping. The sort of stuff you might expect to hear from an actual civil war like the one in Sudan. Indeed, Foreign Policy has argued that we should stop using terms like gang violence in relation to Haiti and instead talk about the nation suffering an actual insurgency. And it's hard to disagree. Aside from opening and burning prisons, the gangs attacked government buildings, including the Interior Ministry. Police stations were torched, as was the home of Police Chief Franz Albe. The Financial Times reported roadblocks and gun battles. The New York Times wrote that dead bodies are rotting on the streets. As gangs took over people's homes, refugees flooded into public spaces, desperate to find safety. Faced with such violence, Ariel Henry's plane was unable to land. Diverted to Puerto Rico, he was told by American and Caribbean leaders to resign. On Monday, March the 11th, he did exactly that, making way for a transitional council that's intended to guide Haiti back to stability. For many, the blame for Haiti's collapse can therefore be laid at Henry's feet. Certainly, the mild-mannered neurosurgeon played a big part in it. Never elected, Henry was appointed to his post in mid-2021 by President Jovenel Moïse just 2 days before he himself was assassinated. Despite his lack of mandate, Henry then assumed control of the government, promising to hold already delayed elections. Instead, he kept delaying them, clinging to power even as the country's last elected officials saw their terms expire, even as his popularity sank and gangs seized control of 80% of Port-au-Prince. He was too weak to do anything to slow the building crisis. So yeah, it's probably fair to say that Ariel Henry should shoulder a lot of the blame for this debacle, as should the countries, including the US, France, and multiple Caribbean states that propped up his rule. To quote the Times, "The catastrophic situation Haiti finds itself in today was not inevitable. It is a direct result of the dithering and delay by Henry and his government, who until recently had the firm backing of the United States and other regional powers. But to say that the current situation was wholly the fault of Henry or his backers is to ignore the longer history. The deeper reasons why Haiti's gangs were able to execute a takeover that the equally brutal gangs of Ecuador were just unable to pull off. The deepest reason of all, the twisted connections tying Haiti's gangs firmly to the nation's elites. Back in the 1990s, Haiti was emerging from a long period of dictatorship and instability. Baby Doc's regime had fallen in 1986, and a 1991 military coup had removed the nation's first democratically elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, from power. This led to a 1994 intervention that restored Aristide, but with trust in the military now so broken, the president disbanded it. Speaking to the Financial Times, Professor Robert Fashion explained what happened next. When he disbanded the army, you had all kinds of political factions, including Aristide himself, who started to create armed groups that would defend the interests of those particular groups. And I'm talking about a wide variety of people in the business community, people in conflicting political parties. The quote ends. Now, these armed groups would become the seeds of today's gangs. Not simple street hoodlums, but non-state actors with elite connections who would use the threat of violence to push elite interests. That might include gangs forcing everyone living in their territory to vote for a specific candidate. It might involve settling business disputes with bullets. The point is that a parasitic relationship developed between Haiti's 1% and the gangs terrifying its streets. Just take the leader of the new gang alliance, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier. According to The Economist, Cherizier founded his gang G9 in 2020, a time when there was a growing protest movement against President Jovenel Moïse. Allegedly, Moïse used G9 against the protesters, keeping the streets quiet through fear. The reporting group Insight Crime claims that G9 got half its funding from the president in this era. We need to stress that such a situation was not unusual in Haiti. Recent attempts by the USA and Canada to sanction those connected to the gangs have discovered evidence linking everyone from business leaders to senators to these armed groups. No. The point is not that Moïse was a criminal, but that effectively Haiti's entire elite is. The only thing that's changed in the last couple of years is the power balance has shifted in favor of the gangsters. Here's Insight Crime again. Prime Minister Henry's resignation underscores how, for the first time, street gangs that once answered to political and economic elites have now emerged as Haiti's dominant power brokers. We can see this clearly just by looking at the fight now surrounding Haiti's planned transitional council. Mandated by regional group CARICOM, the Transitional Council is supposed to be a gathering of 7 members plus 2 non-voting observers from across Haiti's political spectrum. AP News reports that seats have been reserved for groups like civil society leaders Montana Accord, former President Aristide's old party, Famille Lavalas, the parties of other former presidents, Ariel Henry's December 21st Agreement Group, and also the private sector. On top of that, representatives of civil society and the religious sector will have observer seats. At the time of writing, though, the gangs are trying to use their leverage to get seats on the council. Cherizier, for example, released an audio message on WhatsApp that seemed to threaten the families of anyone who joined a council that excluded the gang, saying, "I'll know if your kids are in Haiti, if your wives are in Haiti, if your husbands are in Haiti." As the New York Times summed up, what is apparent is that the gangs are trying to capitalize on their control of Port-au-Prince, the capital, to become a legitimate political force in the negotiations being brokered by foreign governments. This is why foreign policy insists that we should try to understand the situation in Haiti not through the lens of gang violence, but through the lens of insurgency. These guys are not just out for money and business opportunities. They want to take political control of Haiti, to push through a revolution that they feel is going to benefit them. In his audio message, for example, Cherizier talked about how Henry's resignation was only the first step in the battle. A battle that seems to have at least a faint political dimension. In past interviews, Cherizier has tried to frame his actions as an anti-elite uprising. Talking to The New Yorker, he drew a distinction between the lighter-skinned Haitian elites and darker-skinned residents like himself who he characterized as black. His goal, he said, was to ensure Haiti's black people took charge of their own destinies. And to be clear, we're not suggesting you empathize with Cherizier here. The man is a psychopath who has overseen a gang infamous for randomly killing civilians and using rape as a tool of revenge. What we are trying to do is show how Haiti's meltdown has more in common at this point with a full-blown civil war than a temporary breakdown in law and order. That Cherazier and other players aren't just trying to get their kicks looting and killing, but are actively aiming to take over the Haitian state. Among these other players, perhaps the most prominent figure is Guy Philippe, a former coup leader who was recently released from a US prison after serving a 6-year sentence for money laundering and drug trafficking. Now, Guy Philippe's position is different to that of Cherazier. Although the two seem to be working together, Philippe is not exactly a gang leader, so much as a guy trying to start a grassroots revolution. In this, he's helped by opposition leader Moise Jean-Charles, whose Petit Dessalines party was offered a seat on the Transitional Council, only to refuse it. Right now, Charles and Philippe appear to be plotting to use this crisis to bring themselves to power. As part of his positioning, Guy Philippe has started calling for an amnesty for the gangsters, trying to reframe them as marginalized people with no other choice. Talking to the Times, he claims, "Those young girls, those young boys, they have no other opportunity. To die starving or to take weapons, they choose to take weapons." Still, while the current crisis may have a political dimension, there are also signs that the gang's new alliance was also opportunistic. United Nations human rights expert William O'Neill, for one, has argued that the Kenyan police deployment Ariel Henry went abroad to agree put fear of God into the gangs, whose members are mostly teenagers. Fearing defeat if the mission went ahead, they instead combined forces to ensure the deployment would never happen. If that's the case, then they succeeded. After Henry resigned and Haiti plunged into anarchy, Nairobi indicated its police wouldn't be deployed after all, and likely with good reason. With the way things stand now, it's hard to see how anything aside from full military intervention could restore order. At the time of writing, March 15th, things in Haiti are still in a truly dire state. Nearly the whole of Port-au-Prince is under the control of the gangs. Inside Crime reports that key transport routes and 90% of water sources have also fallen to the armed groups. Up to 5.5 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, with key ports for importing food affected by the chaos. It's thought 1 million could be on the brink of famine. Meanwhile, over 350,000 are internally displaced, driven out of their homes by the fighting. All of which returns us to the pressing question of what happens next. What happens now that Haiti appears set to become a North American Somalia? Sadly, this is not an easy question to answer. One possibility is that the international community accepts the need for another military intervention a mere 7 years after the previous UN force left Haiti. Indeed, The Hill reports that a recent Zoom call between representatives of CARICOM, the US, Canada, France, Brazil, and Mexico ended with the insistence that members of Haiti's new Transitional Council must be supportive of an international security mission to be eligible for a seat. But a military intervention is easier said than done, not least because no one knows who will lead it. The United States has long refused to lead another Haiti mission, lest it be portrayed as a colonialist adventure. Canada, Brazil, Mexico have all previously ruled themselves out. Nor is the UN's Divided Security Council likely to be able to agree on the contours of a bigger mission than the Kenyan police deployment. It doesn't help that some aspects of Haitian society are fighting hard against outside interference, fearing it will keep up the cycle of instability and intervention. On the other hand, Haitian-born professor Robert Fathom told the Financial Times that it might be necessary. In his words, "The situation is catastrophic for so many people in the capital city that one can probably assume that if there is a foreign intervention that would be effective enough to stop the violence and tame the gangs, that there would be support." However, he goes on to add that it would have to succeed in its goals very quickly, lest drawn-out fighting turn the population against it. An oft-touted alternative to foreign military deployment is some kind of Haitian-led initiative. Although we should note that no one is sure if even such a thing is possible at this stage. Columnist Lydia Polgreen suggested it could work, but, quote, "it will require a leap of faith and a whole lot of help, financial and otherwise." Of course, financial help, even if large, is preferable to a military intervention that could turn into a quagmire. But it depends on Haiti's elites working together in ways that have eluded them for years to solve the country's political gridlock. Unfortunately, it's not even clear how that gridlock could be solved. The key demand since before Ariel Henry was even appointed to office has been new elections. But it's hard to see how it's physically possible to hold them amid such violence. Even if the gangs could be convinced to allow free and fair elections, foreign policy points out that it likely wouldn't result in a long-term change. As we covered earlier, the majority of Haiti's elites are connected to the gangs, and with a fragmented system of over 250 registered political parties, any election might just create new gridlock and new resentments without fixing anything. Faced with such a complex crisis, it might be tempting for leaders to just throw up their hands and to declare, well, what can we do about it? And walk away. But for governments in the Western Hemisphere, that is unlikely to be an option. If Haiti's collapse isn't arrested, then we can expect the mother of all refugee crises. Already, things are becoming increasingly chaotic near the border with Dominican Republic, and Haiti's immediate neighbor won't be the only one to be affected. In the US, there's a growing fear in the White House that Haiti's meltdown will spark an exodus by sea, that small boats, each carrying hundreds of Haitians, will try and make the dangerous journey to Florida's shores to escape the unrest. According to CNN, Washington is drawing up emergency plans to turn part of Guantanamo Bay into a processing center for Haitian refugees, but that will still require dangerous at-sea interceptions by the US Coast Guard. And what of the Haitian people themselves? Will regional governments really be willing to leave them at the mercies of violent gangsters and warlords? And look, these are not questions with easy answers, and it remains to be seen what the global community will do. With nothing but bad or unworkable options on the table, it's hard to see any way out of the growing crisis. Yet doing nothing could easily turn out to be the worst option of all. And as we end today's episode then, it is with Haiti in a state of freefall, with the country 2 hours flight from Miami in danger of becoming a Caribbean Somalia with all the instability that could imply. And we'll be honest here, we don't have a solution for this. Each potential option, from military intervention to simply washing our hands of it, comes with myriad pitfalls and ways it could wind up making everything 1,000 times worse. The only thing we can say for certain is that something does need to be done, because Haiti is now sliding into the abyss, and the longer our leaders wait to act, the worse it could get, and the more acute the suffering of Haiti's ordinary people could become.